She remembered my birthday. We had met exactly once. A cocktail napkin. A circled date. A stranger's neat handwriting. I never gave her my number. She never asked twice. 6 years passed. A card arrived with no return address. Inside. My name. My birthday. For words that undid me. I never stopped waiting for you. I hadn't seen her since the night I walked away. My name is Maya Chun. 27. A pastry chef at my family's bakery in Seattle's Chinatown International District. Raised between flower-dusted mornings and my parents' quiet expectations. That spring. A week before my birthday. I sat at my kitchen table holding a napkin I'd carried through 5 apartments, wondering if I'd finally lost my mind. It started at a charity gala 18 months earlier. A fundraiser for the community center where I'd donated a 3-tier lemon cake for the silent auction. I was refilling the dessert table when a woman in a green dress leaned over the cake, studying the piping like it was a museum exhibit. "Did you make this yourself?" she asked. And I nodded. Too nervous to explain that baking was the only thing I never doubted about myself. Her name was Elena. She talked about lemon zest like it mattered. And I forgot. 4:20 minutes. To check the time. We ended up by the window. Away from the noise. Comparing childhood kitchens and the smell of vanilla in our grandmother's houses. She asked when my birthday was. Almost as an afterthought. And I told her without thinking. The way you tell a stranger something small. She grabbed a napkin from the bar and wrote the date down, underlining it twice, like it was something worth remembering. "So I don't forget," she said, folding it and tucking it into my coat pocket instead of her own purse. Before I could ask for her number, someone called her name from across the room. "Urgent." And her face changed instantly. She squeezed my hand once, said, "It was really nice meeting you, Maya," and disappeared into the crowd like she'd never been there. I waited by the dessert table for 20 more minutes, feeling foolish, telling myself it didn't matter, that strangers don't circle back. I went home that night, put the napkin in a drawer, and told myself the whole evening had just been a nice memory. A year later, on my birthday, an envelope showed up at the bakery with no return address. Just my name and handwriting I half recognized. Inside was a card with a single sunflower drawn on the front and no signature. Just the words "Happy Birthday. I hope the cake was yours." I compared the handwriting to the napkin still folded in my drawer. And my stomach dropped when the looping E's matched exactly. I told my best friend Priya, who just raised her eyebrows and said, "So the mystery woman from the gala tracked down your bakery?" I didn't tell my parents. My mother already had a spreadsheet of eligible bachelors from her church group, updated every few months. The next year, another card came, this time with a small hand-drawn cupcake, and the same 4 words, "I hope the cake was yours." I started dating that spring. A nice man named Trevor my mother introduced me to, and I spent our second date thinking about lemon zest. Trevor was kind, stable, exactly what my parents wanted. And I broke it off after 2 months because I kept comparing silences to hers. My brother David teased me relentlessly, calling her napkin girl, though even he admitted the persistence was, in his words, kind of romantic. I tried searching for Elena online, but without a last name. Elena in Seattle turned up thousands of profiles and none of them felt right. The postmarks on the envelopes were smudged, different cities each year, as if she moved often or mailed them through someone else. By the 3rd card, I'd started keeping them in a small cedar box my grandmother had left me, alongside her old recipe cards. I began to notice how I measured every date against that one gala evening, how nothing since had made me forget to check the time. My mother asked why I hadn't settled down, and I almost told her about the napkin before deciding it would only worry her more. On slow mornings at the bakery, I'd catch myself designing sunflower cakes, telling customers it was just a new seasonal pattern I liked. Priya asked once if I was building a fantasy out of 4 sentences a year, and I couldn't honestly say she was wrong. The fourth card arrived with a small return address partially visible under the stamp, just enough to make out Francisco, CA. I stared at that fragment for a week, turning it over like it was a clue in a case I hadn't meant to open. My father's restaurant, 2 doors down from my bakery, had been struggling since a new development went up across the street. He never said much about it, but I noticed him staying later, recalculating orders, cutting portions on the family meal we shared each Sunday. I offered to help with the books, and he waved me off, saying a man doesn't burden his daughter with a sinking ship. That year, my birthday card said something new. I think about lemon zest more than I should. I hope you're well, Maya. It was the first time she'd used my name in a card, and I read that sentence probably 30 times before I put it away. Something in me shifted, a quiet decision forming that I hadn't voiced yet, even to myself. Even lying awake at 2 in the morning, I told Priya I wanted to go to San Francisco for the annual Pacific Pastry Invitational, a competition I'd been putting off entering for years. For the pastry contest, I said. Obviously. And she smiled the way people smile when they know you're lying to yourself. My mother was thrilled I was finally doing something career-focused, and helped me pick out a blazer for the competition dinner. My father seemed distracted when I told him, mentioning almost offhand that his landlord's company was based somewhere in the Bay Area too. I didn't think much of that detail then, filing it away the way you file away things that seem unrelated to your own story. I packed the cedar box of birthday cards, unsure why, telling myself it was just for luck during the competition. The night before I left, I unfolded the original napkin one more time, tracing the circle date like a compass needle. Priya drove me to the airport and made me promise to text her the second, and I mean the second, anything happened. You're not just going for the contest, she said at the gate. And I didn't have the energy left to argue with her. The flight felt longer than 3 hours, my mind running through every version of a reunion that could possibly go wrong. I checked into a small hotel near Union Square, laid the entry ingredients out on the bed, and tried to focus on my competition menu. I told myself I'd research the return address after the contest, that I needed my hands steady for tomorrow's judging round first. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept picturing green dresses and lemon cake and a hand writing my birthday like it mattered. The competition venue was a converted warehouse near the waterfront, sponsored, according to the banner, by several local business groups. I scanned the sponsor names out of habit, and one logo, a stylized R, tugged at something I couldn't place yet. During setup, another competitor mentioned the venue's owner casually, a family called Reyes. Old San Francisco money, restaurants and real estate both. My hands went still over my mixing bowl. Reyes could mean nothing. Elena had never given me a last name at all. I told myself hundreds of families were named Reyes in California. That coincidence wasn't the same thing as fate, and kept working my dough. That evening, plating my final dessert, a lemon tart with candied zest, I thought of the gala, of green dresses, of one careless afternoon. The judges called my name for second place, and in the applause, I scanned the crowd out of habit, half hoping and half dreading. She wasn't there. Of course, it was ridiculous to think she would be standing at the edge of a stranger's pastry competition. Later, back at the hotel, I finally searched Reyes Family San Francisco real estate, and the first result made my whole body go cold. The article was about the Reyes Group's recent acquisitions, and the woman quoted as Vice President of Development was named Elena Reyes. I stared at the photo attached to the article for a long time before I was sure enough of myself to breathe again. It was her. Older by the years I'd counted in birthday cards, hair shorter, but unmistakably the woman from the gala. The article mentioned her family's recent purchase of several commercial properties, including a block in Seattle's Chinatown International District, my father's block. My stomach dropped as I scrolled further and saw a building address that matched, almost exactly, the one printed on my father's lease. I called him immediately, forgetting the time difference, and he picked up groggy, asking if something was wrong at the bakery. Dad, who's your landlord's company? Asked, and he read me a name off an old letter. Reyes Group Holdings, LLC. He said they'd sent a notice about restructuring the property, language vague enough to have kept him up for weeks without telling me. I sat on the hotel bed, cedar box beside me, trying to reconcile a woman who wrote sunflower cards with one dismantling my father's livelihood. Priya, on the phone, was blunt. Maybe it's a coincidence. Or maybe the woman you've been pining over for years is bulldozing your dad's restaurant. I couldn't sleep that night, replaying every card, wondering if the sunflowers had been some strange, guilty apology I hadn't understood. The next morning I found the Reyes Group offices listed downtown, and walked there before I could talk myself out of it. The lobby was glass and marble, nothing like the warm, unguarded woman who'd once talked to me about her grandmother's kitchen. The receptionist said Ms. Reyes was in meetings all week and offered to schedule something for sometime next month. Potentially. I left my name and, on impulse, wrote my birthday on the message slip. The same date circled on a napkin years ago. I flew home without seeing her, my competition trophy feeling suddenly small against the weight of what I now had to tell my father. Sunday dinner. I told my parents everything. The napkin, the cards, the Reyes name. Watching my father's face shift through disbelief and worry. My mother, practical as always, asked if this Elena person could actually help save the restaurant or if she was simply the enemy now. My father said quietly that a company doesn't care whose name is on a napkin, only what a property is worth on paper. Weeks passed with no reply from San Francisco. No card. No call. Only an official letter confirming lease renegotiation talks in 90 days. David, my brother, started digging on his own, finding old society pages mentioning Elena Reyes at various galas, always polished, always composed. One article, dated only 2 months earlier, referenced her as recently engaged to finance executive Marcus Whitfield, with a photo of the two together. I read that sentence more times than I'd read any birthday card, feeling something in my chest quietly, methodically, fold in on itself. Priya tried to console me, saying engagement announcements sometimes lagged behind reality, but I told her to stop making excuses for a stranger. I put the cedar box on the top shelf of my closet, behind winter coats, telling myself I was done chasing ghosts in green dresses. I threw myself into the bakery instead, testing new recipes late into the night, trying to outwork the ache instead of naming it. My father's restaurant received a formal notice. The Reyes Group intended to redevelop the block into mixed-use retail within the next 18 months. He didn't yell. He just sat at the kitchen table that night, turning his reading glasses over in his hands, saying nothing for a long time. I told him I'd handle it, though I had no idea what handling it could possibly mean against a company with that much money. I drafted an email to the Reyes Group, professional, detached, requesting a formal meeting regarding the lease terms for my father's business. I signed it Maya-chan, Golden Sparrow Bakery, deliberately leaving out anything personal, anything that might reveal I'd once memorized a stranger's handwriting. A reply came back within a day, not from an assistant, but from Elena herself, requesting to meet in person the following week. I told myself it was strictly business. I told myself that at least 4 times while choosing what to wear to the meeting. Her office was smaller than I expected, cluttered with sticky notes and half-finished coffee. Nothing like the sterile lobby downstairs. She stood when I walked in, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The years between us suddenly very loud. "You cut your hair," I said, immediately regretting it as the only sentence I could manage after everything I'd rehearsed. "You still make lemon cakes," she said back, gesturing at a small box on her desk. One of my competition entries. Somehow. Asked. more sharply than I intended. How she could send sunflower cards for years while quietly buying up my father's block. Her face changed. Confusion first, then something closer to horror. As she asked what exactly I thought she'd been doing, I told her about the notice, the redevelopment plan, my father's sleepless nights, and watched her expression harden into something unreadable. That decision wasn't mine, she said. I've been fighting my mother about that block for months. I didn't even know it was his. I wanted to believe her, and hating myself for wanting to. I asked about the engagement announcement instead, needing to know that too. She went quiet, then said the announcement was old, that she'd ended things with Marcus 3 months before it was ever published. The paper never ran a correction, she said. My mother made sure of that. It looked better for the merger talks. I didn't understand yet what merger talks meant, only that everything about her life sounded like a negotiation I wasn't equipped for. Why didn't you ever just call me? I asked, my voice cracking despite every effort to keep this conversation professional and controlled. She looked down at her desk, at the small cake box, and said, because I didn't know how to be someone's choice instead of an asset. I left the meeting with more questions than answers. The redevelopment notice still active. My father's restaurant still hanging by unresolved paperwork. Over the next month, Elena and I exchanged emails that slowly stopped being strictly about lease terms and started sounding like the gala again. She told me about growing up in a family where love was always weighed against usefulness, where marriages were merger opportunities disguised as romance. I told her about my parents' spreadsheet of bachelors, and for the first time in weeks, she actually laughed through the phone. David admitted, sheepishly, that years ago he'd found an old business card of Elena's assistant and mailed it a note asking her to please keep sending the cards, worried I'd give up hoping. I was furious at first, then strangely moved, realizing my brother had quietly kept a small flame alive I hadn't asked him to protect. Elena said she hadn't needed the encouragement, that she'd never once considered stopping, only struggled with how to step past paper and ink. Her mother, Diane Reyes, summoned her for a meeting when she learned Elena was personally involved in the Chinatown lease negotiations. Elena told me later that her mother said, plainly, that mixing business with personal distractions was exactly how families lost money and reputation. I asked if I was the distraction, and Elena said, quietly, that I was the only thing in years that had felt like clarity. My father, meanwhile, grew thinner around the edges, staying up calculating how many months the restaurant had left if negotiations failed. I finally told him everything, including my growing feelings for the woman on the other side of the negotiating table, bracing for his disapproval. He was quiet for a long moment before saying he remembered a napkin falling out of my coat pocket years ago, and my mother had kept it. That detail stunned me. My mother had found the original napkin, read it, and said nothing, tucking it into a drawer of her own. She'd hoped, she admitted later, that whoever wrote it would eventually find her way back, though she never dared say that out loud before. Diane Reyes scheduled a formal vote among family stakeholders to finalize the redevelopment plan, giving Elena 2 weeks to change anyone's mind. Elena proposed an alternative, converting part of the block into a mixed cultural marketplace, preserving existing small businesses instead of demolishing them entirely. Her mother dismissed the plan outright, calling it sentimental and financially reckless, exactly the kind of thinking that had no place in real estate. I offered to help Elena build a real proposal, spreadsheets and all, staying up with her over video calls until neither of us tracked the hours. Working alongside her felt different than the gala, less like a fairy tale and more like something solid I could actually hold on to. Priya warned me not to get swept up again, reminding me how badly the engagement headline had wrecked me only weeks earlier. I told her this felt different, that Elena was choosing to fight instead of disappearing, and Priya, reluctantly, admitted that mattered. Marcus, Elena's former fiancé, resurfaced during this time, apparently pressured by both families to reconsider the broken engagement for business reasons. Elena told him plainly, in front of both their mothers, that she wasn't available for reconsideration. Not now. Not for any amount of merger value. Diane Reyes accused Elena of throwing away the family's legacy for some baker's daughter, a sentence Elena later repeated to me, voice shaking with anger. I asked if I should step back. If my presence was making an already difficult fight harder for her inside her own family. She said stepping back was the one thing she refused to let either of us do again. Not after everything the napkin had already survived. My father's health scare came without warning. A mild heart episode from stress, landing him in the hospital for 2 frightening days. I sat beside his bed reading old birthday cards aloud, sunflower after sunflower, until he smiled weakly and told me to stop worrying so much. Elena showed up at the hospital unannounced, holding a small lemon cake from my own bakery, having asked my staff for the recipe herself. My father studied her for a long moment, then asked if she was the one who'd written on the napkin all those years ago. She said yes. And he nodded slowly, saying only, "Took you long enough," which somehow felt like the most honest blessing he could give. The stakeholder vote was scheduled for the following week, timed cruelly close to my birthday. The same date circled years ago on that napkin. Elena worked nights preparing her presentation, determined to save both the block and, she admitted, some version of the future she wanted for us. Her mother threatened, in private, to cut her from decision-making entirely if the vote failed, treating the outcome as a referendum on Elena's judgment. I told Elena I didn't need her to win a boardroom fight to prove anything to me, that I already believed in her choices. She said she needed to win it for herself, not for me. To prove she could choose both her family's legacy and her own life. The night before the vote, we sat on my apartment floor surrounded by spreadsheets, and she finally asked why I'd kept the napkin so long. I told her it was the only thing that had ever made me feel chosen without having to prove I deserved it first. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper, a copy of the very first napkin. Kept all these years too. I never sent the original back with the cards, she admitted. I kept it. I needed something to hold on to besides hope. We stayed up past midnight rehearsing her proposal. And somewhere between spreadsheet slides, the conversation stopped being about business at all. My mother called that night, asking if I was seeing the Reyes girl seriously. And for the first time, I said yes without hesitation. She was quiet. Then said my grandmother always believed a person's fate was written before they ever met. They just had to notice it. The morning of the vote, my father insisted on coming despite doctor's orders, saying no daughter of his was facing that boardroom alone. Priya closed the bakery for the afternoon, gathering half the neighborhood outside the Reyes group building in a show of quiet, stubborn support. Elena texted me from inside. Just 3 words, walking in now, and I stood outside with my father's hand tight around mine. David held up a hand-painted sign that simply read "Sunflowers over bulldozers," which made even the security guard outside crack a smile. I didn't know what would happen inside that room, only that whatever the vote decided, I wasn't going to disappear again, and neither was she. Inside, Elena stood before the family board and laid out her mixed-use proposal, numbers and community impact side by side on the screen. Diane Reyes interrupted twice, calling the plan naive, until one of the older board members, Elena's uncle, asked to see the full financial model. Elena's projections showed the cultural marketplace could match projected retail revenue within 5 years, while preserving 40-year-old family businesses along the block. Her uncle, quiet through most of the meeting, finally said the Reyes name meant nothing if it stood only for demolishing what people built. Diane pushed back one final time, saying legacy meant nothing without profit, and Elena answered that legacy meant nothing without the people who trusted them. The vote was called. 3 in favor of the original redevelopment, 5 in favor of Elena's mixed-use marketplace plan, including her own vote. Diane Reyes sat in stunned silence as her daughter, for the first time in the company's history, had outvoted her on a major decision. Elena walked out of that boardroom pale but steady, and the moment she saw me waiting outside, something in her whole posture loosened. She didn't say anything at first, just crossed the lobby and wrapped her arms around me in front of my entire gathered neighborhood. My father, leaning on his cane, said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Well, someone finally remembered whose block this actually is." The crowd outside cheered. Priya cried. David's sign got passed around for photos, and somewhere in the noise, Elena kissed my forehead, quiet and certain. In the weeks that followed, the marketplace plan moved forward, my father's restaurant securing a renewed, protected lease under the new development terms. Diane Reyes, humbled but not entirely defeated, eventually invited my family to a dinner, calling it stiffly an introduction, not an apology. My mother brought a tray of dumplings to that dinner, informing Diane that in her family, you don't discuss business without feeding people first. Elena's uncle turned out to be, unexpectedly, a fan of my lemon tarts, requesting the recipe for his own granddaughter's birthday that spring. As my birthday approached again, this time the actual day and not just a card in the mail, Elena asked what I wanted most. I told her the truth, just her, in person. On the actual date, instead of ink circled on a napkin from 3,000 miles away, she showed up at my apartment that morning holding a small sunflower cake, handwritten card resting on top, for familiar words facing up. "I hope the cake was yours," it read, and beneath it, for the first time, an actual signature. "Always, Elena." I asked her, only half joking, if she'd ever explain why she waited 6 birthdays before finally showing up on the actual day. She said she'd needed 6 years to become someone capable of choosing me over everything her family had built without ever asking her. My father, watching from the doorway with my mother, said he'd known the moment he saw that napkin fall from my coat. "Years ago, your mother kept it because she believed it," he said. "I kept quiet because I trusted you'd find your way back to it." That evening, the whole block gathered outside the bakery for an impromptu birthday celebration. String lights strung between the marketplace's newly protected storefronts. Elena stood beside me at the counter, both of us covered in flour, laughing at how far a single circle date had actually traveled. She told me, quietly, that the assistant who'd mailed the cards each year had actually been her cousin, sworn to secrecy since the very first one. "I couldn't risk my mother tracing it back to me," she admitted. "So every envelope went out from a different city. On purpose. That explained the smudged postmarks. The different cities each year. A small, careful conspiracy built entirely around remembering one stranger's birthday." My mother pulled out the original napkin that night, pressed flat inside a frame she'd apparently been keeping ready for this exact moment. She handed it to Elena, saying only, "Every family needs proof of where things started," and Elena's eyes filled with tears she didn't bother hiding. Priya raised a toast with sparkling cider, calling us the slowest, most stubborn love story Seattle's Chinatown International District had ever witnessed. David, predictably, proposed a toast to Napkin Girl, and the whole block laughed, including Elena, who'd clearly heard the nickname before now. Standing there, surrounded by flower dust and string lights and every person who'd waited years for this exact extraordinary evening, I finally exhaled. I thought about the version of me who'd waited by that dessert table alone. Certain strangers don't circle back. Certain hope was foolish. She had circled back 6 times over, in ink and paper, and finally, standing in my kitchen, in person, for good. A year later, we stood in that same marketplace, now filled with reopened family shops, exchanging rings beneath the same string lights. The napkin hangs framed above our register today, A small circle date proving that sometimes the quietest promises are the ones people actually keep. Then D.